TPO is there?
Nope. That is new. You are correct. Um, all right. So today we're going to be talking about developing characters. A lot of this is going to be about showing rather than telling, just because that is such a good principle. We will talk about what that means. So please pause if you don't know what that means. Explain.
So it's basically not saying like
um,
doing in just like showing what
that
the
is going to be part of
character
it.
is.
Yeah.
So,
But we're also going to talk about what ways you can use showing to develop the character. A lot of times I've noticed, especially in short stories, like with the Scary Story contest, because it has such a short, people are like, oh, better to tell a really heckin' long story with all telling than to tell a good short story. Wrong. Um, do as much showing as you can. Telling a little bit tactfully can be useful to cut down on word count and to get story points across. But if you just tell us the entire story, it's not very interesting. What we like to read is stuff that immerses us in the world and the character, and we can't feel very immersed in the world and the character if it's just, here's some information, blah. That just feels like a textbook. That just means like the teacher's just being like, hi, here's all this information, and you're bored, right? Now, if the teacher was telling you a story in a very immersive manner and did all these cool stuff, you'd be like, wow, I'm actually interested. No, they have to tell you boring stuff. We don't have to as writers. We don't have to make it boring. In fact, it's our job to make it interesting. So, first thing we're going to talk about, and this is I've heard a lot of people debate this. You may run into the problem of the fact that when you describe characters, people are like, oh, well, I misinterpreted their description, and so I think they look like this. You may run into that problem, but but a lot of people use that as an excuse, saying that is why I shouldn't describe my characters. Incorrect. People are going to misunderstand what your character looks like, no matter whether you describe them or not. So then if they're not described, it's going to be worse, because everyone's going to be like, she's Asian. Actually, chapter 34 says dark skin, so I think she's African American. Well, I think, like, oy, gross. No, stop. It's just going to cause massive problems, and all of your readers are going to be fighting each other over what the heck your character looks like, because it matters to people. Also, secondarily, there is actually, you want your, hold on, you want all your potential readers to be able to read your, no matter what they look like, no matter how they feel, no matter what they're doing, you want them to be able to access that knowledge, right? There is actually a condition, it's a rare condition, but it is a condition called aphantasia. It is where if you do not describe something to someone, they literally see nothing in their head. Blob. So if you don't describe your character, they literally cannot imagine the story and they are going to put the book down. Now, is it a rare condition? Yes. But at the same time, wouldn't you rather make it accessible to everyone and more interesting and immersive to everyone instead of just being like, screw those aphantasia people. They can just see a blob and be bored. Like, no.
it's not like how that might like selling or whatever, but that's
So,
not really nice either.
exactly. Nice. It's good to have it be inclusive of everyone. And on top of that, it can be a crucial way of showing who they are as a person. You may notice that as someone with long hair, I do tend to fiddle with my hair a lot, right? And so that's just part of who I am. If you did not describe me with long hair the entire story and then all of a sudden had me fiddling with long hair, all the people who thought I had a really, really short pixie cut are going to be very confused. And then you're just going to have confused readers. So, in general, I would say when people say, like, leave it up to the reader to decide what they look like, incorrect. Don't do that. All you're going to do is have confused readers, readers that are pulled out of the story when you do have to describe things later, readers that are confused when they think that the character is African American, and then they're like, oh, by the way, they're Chinese heritage, and they're like, what? You don't want to confuse your reader, and not describing your character is just going to leave people in the dark. It's not going to be helpful for anyone. All right, now, talking about describing characters, the best thing that you can do is to describe them in a way that shows action. So like with the long hair, you don't have to say she has long hair. However, say she fiddled with her long hair. That indicates about how long it is too. If you want to say like she fiddled near her shoulder, that's going to say it's about this length. Or if she fiddled down near her waist, then it also shows length of hair without saying she has waist length hair. You can also in that way indicate what type of hair, because if you could say she fiddled with her blonde hair, now you know what kind of hair she has, instead of just saying blonde hair. And then with eyes are the easiest thing to do. Even if the character's blind, they're still going to look in a certain direction, even if they can't see something. And so as a result, you can just say like her brown eyes bored into the wall or something like that. Even if they're blind, they still have a color of eyes and they can still look in a direction. Um, and you can always have those expressions too, like her green eyes glared at me. That gives pop of emotion as well as helping describe to us what the character looks like. Now, moving on to cultural things. Keep in mind, try not to use food-based descriptors. A lot of people find that very rude. Um, so, like, for example, say your skin is as white as milk. People find that rude. And so as a result, a lot of people prefer more either just regular, just say what color it is, or alternatively, if you're going to give a metaphor, people prefer to have earth-based metaphors like skin is white as daisy petals or something like that. That seems more reverent, whereas when you say food, that feels a little weird. It's like you're saying they're delicious or yummy, and that comes off wrong. Unless you're trying to write a romance, in which case I guess you can do that, but some people still go ew. So in general, don't use food descriptors if you're describing how someone looks. Even if you are doing the delicious romance thing, people tend to go gross. um, Next thing, with cultural differences, make sure that you do a lot of research and that you are gentle and respectful when talking about things, especially if you're not familiar with. And if you can find someone from that culture and ask them questions, absolutely do so, because that will not only help inform your research, but also that way when someone says, well, that's not how I experienced it, you can be like, well, this is a firsthand account from someone else. And then they can be like, oh, okay, I get that. So in general, it helps to be gentle with you. Just keep respect in mind, even if you're doing like a historical piece. For example, Mark Twain had this issue where a lot of people were like, "Oh, he's racist." Mark Twain was not racist. He was one of the least racist people ever. But the reason he sounds racist is because he writes a lot of characters who are racist. And so keep in mind, even when you have racist characters, try to make sure that you are not having your characters of other races fall into stereotypes. That's when it makes it seem like you are racist rather than the characters being racist. Having racism in books is not a problem because it's a real thing. Like, yes, is it a problem in real life? Should it not be happening? Yes, but it is unfortunately just part of life. And so if you have some racist characters, that's okay. It's part of life. But don't let it influence how you stereotype your characters. Avoid stereotypes in general. All right, moving forward. With cultural differences, you can use this to help develop your character. How they see the world will drastically be influenced by how they see the world, by how things are done in their household, right? If they grew up in an abusive household, they're going to act like an entirely different person than someone who grew up in a very supportive household, right? Those are entirely different. And cultural differences, too. There are a lot of people who grew up in a Latin household that are entirely different than people who grew up in an African American household because they have very different cultural ideas of how to raise kids. And so just that as a basis will make them different and unique. And that's another reason why it's important to make sure you do that research. Figure out what those kinds of people are like if you haven't met them. And if you have met them, talk to your friend and be like, yo, what's it like? Tell me. Like, what are different? What are differences we have? What are similarities we have? What are things that affected you growing up that maybe I didn't experience? All right, now the one problem you're going to run into is obviously fantasy, because you're making up your own cultures.
or
But
like fan fiction.
Or fan. Um, with that being said, with fan fiction, I would say just do as much research as you can, kind of similar to the real culture thing. Just read and read and read all of that material as much as you can to fully understand it. With fantasy, I would say look at real cultures and try to determine what similarities your own fantasy cultures might have. What similarities do you like? You can mix and match too. You don't have to be like, the elves are all purely Chinese. Like, no, you can be like, well, I like these Chinese legends of dragons. I'm going to mix that with these fey changeling myths from Ireland. And like, you can mix and match and make things all sorts of fun. But keep in mind again how those cultures mix, how that dynamic will change how people act, and change how people dress, how people feel, how people interact. People are very easily influenced creatures. I mean, heck, even just the friends you choose. I know that every time that I have chosen a new group of friends or had a new friend join my group and they talk differently, I sometimes pick up some of their mannerisms, you know? You're like, oh, I like that. I'm going to say that now. We're very easily influenced people. And so as a result, you got to keep that in mind when you're creating cultures too. What cultures influenced each other? What cultures didn't influence each other? What cultures were unfortunately totally eradicated due to racism or other problems? Like, take a deep dive on that with your fantasy cultures. All right, moving back to characters fully. So, don't tell us their secrets easily. First of all, your characters should have secrets. We all have secrets, whether they're big or small. They don't have to be like, my parents died and secretly it was my fault. Ugh. Like yes, you can have a big deep secret like that if you want, but you can also just even have small things like, hey, my hair is secretly originally blonde, but I dye it red because I really want to be a redhead secretly, and I don't tell anyone. You know, that's still a secret and that's still interesting and it makes you wonder why she wants to be a redhead so bad. You know, it intrigues us. um, but that being said, don't have us just easily the secret like halfway through the story. Oh no, you found me out. Like, that's boring. But if you want to have a secret, the best way to do it, I actually saw this quote the other day that I really liked. Have your character act about their secret the same way that a character would hide a wound that they don't want anyone to see. You know, how would they go about that? How would they make sure that it keeps absolutely out of sight for everyone? But also, how would other people notice and catch on to that secret and maybe go, that's weird, that's odd, what is going on here, and want to know more?
That's suspicious.
Exactly, or that's suspicious, or that's strange. And instead of just being like, oh no, my secret is out, let me tell you everything. Like, no, that's not interesting. All right. Next thing is talking about hobbies. So, with hobbies, a lot of you may just be like, well, how do I show that they're into a hobby? No different than a movie would show it, right? They're playing the drums. Clearly, they must be into drums. They have a guitar slung over their back. They're probably a guitar player. They are practicing tossing a football as they walk. Probably a football player. Most of the time, your hobbies are going to influence what you have on you or around you. For example, most writers have at least one notebook on them or a laptop with various writing quotes all over it. And so as a result, that's going to help us go, oh, they're a writer. Oh, they are a sports guy. Oh, they are into Dungeons and Dragons. Most of the time, we kind of wear our hobbies on our sleeve, unless you want it to be their secret. They are secretly a nerd. Gasp. Although that has been overplayed, so maybe don't do that one. Next thing is age. I know age is hard. You want to just tell them they are 12. There are so many ways to do it aside from that. You can have them be in sixth grade, which is naturally a 12-year-old environment. Or if they're not 12 and they're in sixth grade, you can always have people make fun of them or be like, you're so little, you don't belong here, or something like that. And it's like, oh, okay. So maybe they're more like 10 and they skipped a couple grades, you know, something like that. You can get an idea for their age without directly saying they are 10 years old. Like, you don't have to state that. We can figure it out. Your readers are smart. They got this. Another thing you can do is always little siblings. If they have little siblings, they can always be like, why does Tina get to do it? And the mom can be like, well, because Tina's 12 and you're 7. How many times have people with siblings probably heard that phrase? A lot. And so as a result, it's natural dialogue that can tell you how old the character is. Or even things like Harry Potter or Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. They talk about the age purely just because of the fact that it's relevant to what they're doing. In Harry Potter, his birthday is relevant because when you turn 12, you start going to 11, sorry, 11, you start going to Hogwarts, right? And so you know his age at the very beginning. That's what it is. And then same thing with Katniss in the Hunger Games. You know how old she is because she specifically talks about like, man, I can't wait until I'm not involved in the reaping, and that'll be when I'm 18. So in just a couple years, and then you're like, do some math. We know how old she is, you know. And so you can have those kinds of scenarios play up in your novel and come up in your novel. People like talking about their age. It's not that weird. I mean, yes, you can like force it into the dialogue and be like, I'm so excited, I'm 12. That does feel a little forced, but if you say, I'm so excited, I'm 12 because my mom said I could get a phone, that feels natural, you know? Just find some way that it would naturally come up in conversation and see if you can bring it up in conversation or see if you can bring it up in their environment. Like I said, what school are they going to? What kind of activities they're doing? If they can drive, that's going to help us know what kind of age they are, right?
If they're like if it says like they're middle school or elementary or high school or
Yeah,
college.
exactly. Exactly. If they're walking to high school in the morning, we can get a guess and an age range. And then if they're, being bullied by the older kids, we can narrow that age range down even more. We don't have to be told exactly what their age is. We can figure it out. Your readers are very capable people, I promise. All right. So, next thing that you want to think about is how watching your own self and your own friends and your own family members reacting to things and doing things and realize that you can learn a lot about someone just by observing. You don't have to tell us they are this, they are that, they do this, they do that. You can just stare at someone long enough and slowly pick up clues. And that's what your reader would like to do. So do the same thing. Don't tell us all about them. Let us watch them and observe them and become kind of the Sherlock to our own story and be like, I wonder if she's into sewing. She has a little like set of needles in her pack and a bunch of thread. We can put that together. We can be interesting and, we can tag on to things. All right. Next thing is think about what kind of things you actually think. A lot of people write internal dialogue incorrectly because they're just using it as a way to info dump. But how do you as a person actually think? And use it realistically in your internal dialogue. You probably aren't thinking, you're like, if I thought I had closed the door and someone like walked in right now, I'd be like, I really thought I'd closed that door. I wouldn't be thinking, I was certain I locked that door because I did so exactly at 2 p.m. And if I am thinking that way, whoa, why am I thinking that way? Maybe some people do think that way, but if so, you want to talk about why they think in such a unique pattern, why time matters to them. If time does matter to them, maybe they're a watchmaker, maybe they are really just obsessed with exactly how long things take. They're very OCD about it or something. Or maybe they're very just interested in making sure they make the most of their time, and so they always note down the time when they do anything. You got to make sure that those kind of details are apparent and they stick out. All right. Using feelings can be a great way to describe how people are, especially when it comes to trauma or neglect or mental health or those kinds of things. They are going to think differently and act differently than your average neurotypical person because they are different. It's just part of who they are. But also be sensitive, be gentle. Obviously, mental health is a sensitive topic, but also it can be really good to see that kind of representation in literature and in media. And so, by all means, please use it. Just make sure that you do your research on what kinds of things those people actually think. So you're not stereotyping them. All right. So you can also use experiences to show different things. For example, if I started like yelling and screaming and frustration and crying over a broken teacup, two things might be happening. One, either they're freaking out for no reason because they're overstimulated and they just had a horrible day and they're like, this is the last straw, man. Like, I've lost it. Today was a bad day. And you can use that to describe that too, where they're just like, man, I just can't do anything right today or something like that. You've probably said similar things to yourself when you're just like, oh, today's bad, you know?
They're super obsessed with teacups.
Yes, exactly. That was going to be my next point. Or maybe it was a teacup that belonged to my grandmother. And so I'm crying because I'm like, grandmother's teacup, man. Like, I can't believe it. It mattered to me, you know? So you can use different scenes to show those types of emotions. Instead of saying this teacup mattered or they're overstimulated, you could just show that in a very beautiful sort of way. All right. Next is speech. You want speech patterns to be different for different people. For example, even if you just look at it on a base level, a 9-year-old will not speak the same way as a 32-year-old. No way in heck. If they do, something's wrong with either one of them. Exactly. They swapped bodies, or the 32-year-old has some sort of like amnesia and forgot how to speak, or alternatively, the 9-year-old was raised by like some sort of genius and is being experimented on. Oh, yes, I know exactly what blah blah blah. Like, no, probably not going to happen. Could happen though, and that's another way you can show uniqueness of your characters. Why is this 9-year-old so freaking smart? Why is this 32-year-old kind of a little off? Like, you can show those kinds of things and make it interesting. Um, think about all those kinds of things. Do they use shorter words? Do they have an accent? Do they use more elegant, elevated words because they think they're just so fancy? You know, oh, perhaps your capricious nature is why you're having trouble. You know, that it comes off very differently than saying you're weird, and yet they're technically the same sentence. Yes, question.
Or another like way of it is like if they stutter a lot, or
Yeah.
if they say
Yes.
or
Or
whatever.
you can also do things like or as. A lot of there's actually what's called the Valley Girl accent, where it goes like if I really really like vanilla ice cream, I'm gonna explode. Like, and they use like a lot. So yeah, absolutely. Overused words can be another way of showing how different characters are. So I'm gonna give an example now of not good character development and then good character development. Okay. Tina was 9 years old. She loved her dolls so much. She brought her doll everywhere with her. Tina has black hair and green eyes, just like her doll. Her mom found the doll very creepy. Her mom told her to stop bringing the doll everywhere, and that made her mad. Bad. Not good. Yes, I agree. Sad trumpet noises. um, Now, we're going to show an example of how all that information can be conveyed, that same amount of information, in a good way. Tina brushed her doll's matching black hair gingerly. She frowned at the stain on the doll's apron and turned her big green eyes towards her mother, begging, "Mom, we need to clean Anna's dress." Her mom shuddered softly before attempting a smile. "Sweetie, I think she'd get fewer stains on her if you didn't keep her at the dinner table all the time." Tina scrunched up her face, her cheeks burning red with rage. That gives a much more vivid scene, right? And yet it said all the exact same information. Now, I will say, when I looked at the word count, it was about 10 words more. So if you're struggling with word count, that can be hard. But I absolutely will say I would rather have a story that is immersive in character and detail down to the last line than I would a really, really well done plot with really, really terrible character development and immersion of scene. That I would just quite frankly the truth. Your plot needs to be good, yes. But if I had to pick what's most important, scene development and character development. Your plot is the third most important thing that you should be writing about, not the first. If you don't have good character or scene development, the good plot won't matter, ultimately. It'll just be an story instead of a good story. And so, plot, even though important, should be the third thing you think about. Character development should be at the forefront, absolutely. That is what's going to draw your reader in, that's what's going to make them intrigued. And then, alternatively, scene development is going to be your second thing. Probably tied with character development, because you also want us to be immersed in where we are and how we're feeling, and the moment and how it immerses us in that world that you have created. So, with that being said, are there any questions about good character If you don't have questions, just like nod so I know who doesn't have questions. Okay, cool. Because otherwise I can't tell. I just stare at you intently and hope that I can read your mind. Ian, any questions? Okay, while you're thinking, I'm going to talk about story contest stuff, as I do every time. Scary story stuff. 1,500 words is the limit. I know it's tough, but I know y'all can do it. It is doable, I promise. And do try to use all 1,500 words. I've noticed the biggest problem recently is that people will do like 1,250 words and then they'll rush the ending because they're worried about running out of words. I would rather have you write a 2,000 word story and then cut out 500 words than I would have you only use like 3/4 of what you need. Like, just write and cut out what you don't need later. Redundancy is another big thing that I've noticed where people are rushing their endings. That's because their beginnings are full of redundant phrases and descriptions. Description is good, but if you're describing the same thing for 2 minutes, too long, cut it, make it more concise, save your word count.
Spread it out.
Exactly. Spread it out, cut things that you don't need. Sorry.
The description of one thing took 2 pages.
Exactly. Too long.
I'm not reading that. It's not reading.
Yep.
I'm just gonna.
It does happen with a lot of classical literature, and I think that's why people think it's okay. It was okay back then. We have learned better. We have realized that is bad writing. Unfortunately, they didn't know that. So for their time, they were great writers. But if they were in this day and age, I guarantee you they wouldn't have written like that because they would have known better. Next thing is that it's due this Saturday before 4 o'clock. And when I say before 4 o'clock, I mean the doors will be locked at 3:55. So make sure you are in well before 4 o'clock if you want to get something in. And then as far as the next contest, it's going to be the first chapter contest. That is not due until December 20th. So you have lots of time to work on that one if you're starting now. Obviously, if you're not starting now, you'll have less time. But if you're starting now, you have lots of time. Take your time. Don't worry about it. That one is a 3,000 word limit. So it's about double. That should be helpful. I know sometimes first chapters can be as many as 6,000 words long. I realize it's hard to ask you to do 3,000. If you have to do a cliffhanger, that's okay. I will say cliffhangers are like something that I would probably discourage in short stories, just because short stories are supposed to be wrapped up with a nice little bow. But with first chapters, totally acceptable. So if you're running out of word count, you're like, oh, it's gonna be a cliffhanger. That's okay. Let it be. Don't worry. We aren't gonna dock you points for having a cliffhanger on a first chapter. It's normal. Very normal.
Because if the chapter is like the first part of the entire book.
Exactly. So having it be on a cliffhanger, perfectly normal. Perfectly normal.
Because it's the hook.
Exactly, because it's the hook. Exactly. All right. Any other questions before I turn off the video? Okay. I'm going to turn off the video anyway, but if you have other questions that come up after I turned it off, that's okay. And I can't think of anything else that's important that we have coming up soon. So I think we're good. All right.